Thanks for checking out another project video. My name is Mitch and this is Made by Mitch. Today I'm going to show you how I made this king size platform bed. Let's check it out. So a while back my wife and I purchased a king size mattress, and we actually had it on the floor for the longest time because I kept promising to build a bed. So I finally got around to building the bed. The first thing I had to do for this bed is cut all of my pieces to length. Now I'm using 2x8s for this project. You can do the same type of thing with 1x8s if you want. I know there's a table saw involved. Not everybody has a table saw. So instead of doing it this way, you can use 1x8s. But what I'm doing here is I'm ripping each side of the board off to create a square board. By the way, I do have detailed plans available for purchase for this bed if you're interested in making one for yourself. Next thing I'm doing here is I'm making a rabbet in the top that will go all the way around the bed. I'm making the first cut. I'm only going in 3/4 of an inch. Then I'm going to flip the board upright and make another pass along the table saw to get rid of the rest of the rabbet portion. Because the boards were warped, this was a little bit challenging to do, and I didn't get perfect rabbets doing it this way, and I had to actually go back in and fix my mistakes. I'll show you what that looks like here, but it turned out pretty good for the most part. There were a few imperfections where the blade didn't go all the way down, so I used a chisel just to clean up some of those areas. Next, I'm creating rabbets on the end, and to do this I just used a speed square. I marked my place, and then I just used the circular saw to cut all the notches in this, and then I cleaned it out with a chisel. If you don't have a table saw, or maybe this type of joinery freaks you out a little bit, I do have a video on my channel where I made a twin size bed and I used all 1x lumber, so you don't need a table saw, and it's a good alternate method to get the same type of results. So check that video out, it might give you some further inspiration. You can see there's a little bit of imperfections in the depth of the rabbets. It's not quite meeting up. So what I did to fix that is I set the depth of my circular saw and I ran multiple passes along the board. Then I went in with a chisel and made sure that all of the areas were even with one another. This seemed to work really well. Again, because the boards were warped, that's why I did this, but this cured this problem. So on the opposite side of the board, I had the other problem. Instead of it being too thick, I cut too much off because the board was warped. So I took a shim of wood that I had cut off previously and I glued that in place using plenty of clamps to hold it in there. I used a hand plane to make this flush with the rest of the board, and by the time it was all finished up and I sanded it down, you couldn't even tell that there was an issue. And after sanding the seam, I mixed up some sawdust and wood glue. I spread that over the seam and you couldn't even tell. Next, it's time to move on to the legs. And so the first thing I did for the legs is I cut them all to length. I did the same thing on the table saw, cutting off all of the sides, and then I went in, sanded everything down, and then I created tapers on these legs. So the first thing I did was I marked each place where the taper would be, and then I used a straight edge, level in this case, to create my straight line from one mark to the other mark. Then I propped the board up, used a circular saw to make my cut. And I really like the way these legs turned out. So after getting the legs cut and I had all my sides and ends cut, now I could go in and try to place the legs. And I'm creating a rabbet here as well, that way it would support all of the weight of the bed frame. And so I first marked where that would be, and I made sure to label each leg with each corner, so that way I wouldn't get them confused, and because I'm creating rabbets, it would create a little bit of a problem if I didn't do that. So I marked them, and then I did the same thing with the circular saw. As I started one cut, and then about every 1/8 inch I would make a cut, Then I would go in with a chisel and get all of this material out. Now that the legs are all ready to go, I went ahead and sanded everything all the way up to 220 grit, and I did take a router to the legs, which looking back I would not have done this. I would have kept the same edge as the bed. I don't know why I did this, and it doesn't look awful, but I definitely would have not done this if I would do this again. The next thing I did was just apply finish, and I chose Danish oil for this project. I did use a rag here to wipe on the Danish oil, and then I realized later that it was much better if I used a foam brush. I just feel like it got a lot more even of a coat on this, and I did one coat of the Danish oil, and then I went in and I didn't show this in the video, but later on went in and sealed this with polyacrylic. The next thing I had to do was attach the legs to the end pieces. I do have plans available for this bed if you're interested in making this, and it shows you step by step what you need to do and where all of these parts and pieces fit in together. But I just attached the legs to the end pieces, and then I can go ahead and add the hardware that would attach the side pieces to the end pieces. I know it sounds really confusing. It'll all make sense here once I start assembling the bed. I picked this hardware up on Amazon. I'll leave a link for that in the description below. It was really inexpensive, and it's seemed to hold up really well so far. So I just attached the hardware to the end pieces, and I used this guide board to make sure that everything was going on straight and flush, and it needed to be where it was going. I would attach the other part whenever I would assemble the bed for the final time. The next thing I did was I added a bracket for the middle section of the bed. This would go from one end to the other to support the middle of the bed frame. And I just used a deck bracket that you would get for your joists for building a deck. So then I brought everything up into the bedroom to start assembling everything together. I started to put the ends together and realized that flipping them upside down was a lot easier to do it this way since the top would be flush. And so I just laid everything out where it needed to go. I made my marks, and then I pre-drilled and I added screws to the hardware. Once everything was fit, I just tightened up the bolts of the hardware, and it sat together really nicely. Once all the hardware was attached, I could flip everything back over the right side up, and then I assembled together for the first time, and it's actually really starting to take shape, and it's looking really good. I'm getting the effect I wanted with the 3/4 inch look on top, but still I have the bulk of the thickness of the bed on the bottom. Then it was time to cut my middle brace, and this is a 2x6, and so I just added this in the place where the brackets were already installed, and then I drilled this in place. I didn't worry about finishing this because it's going to be covered up anyways. And then I cut my slats out of 1x4 for the bed, and this was the final result. I'm really happy with the way this turned out. It's extremely heavy duty and solid, and I know that because of adding the rabbets on the legs that this thing is never going anywhere. It supports the weight really nicely, so I'm super happy with the way this turned out. Click right here to check out some of the other projects I have on my channel. Thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next video.